Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to be going through the first episode of a series recap for the Rook and Rose series. That's right, we're going to talk about The Mask of Mirrors. I know that so many of you have been waiting for this video for the last couple of months because my subscribers are the ones who voted for this to be the next book that I do my kind of analytical deep dive videos on. And I had an idea for this one to do a series recap because these are quite chunky reads. This one was 630-ish pages. And you might not be someone who likes to binge series. So if you read this and want to wait 6 months or a year, you're going to forget some details. And so that's why I'm here. I'm going to go through an actual summary of important events that occur in this book, things that you need to know going into the second book. And we're also going to, after the summary, talk about some questions that are left within this story that I'm dying for the answers, even though I already know the answers because I've read the whole series. But I'm sure that if this is your first time through, you will be dying to know. And then I'm not going to answer the questions, by the way. Like this is a spoiler-filled vlog or a spoiler-filled summary for this book only. I will not be going into any details for the second or the third books until I do those videos. After I go through questions that we still have at the end of the summary, I will also talk through some of my favorite moments within this book, and then also just some themes that I saw throughout the way, and then, throw in a couple of things that maybe I didn't get to talk about that I would really like to. Due to the fact that this is a 630-page book, I don't think that any summary I could give you would fully give this book justice. There is so much detail within this story, character development, also the intricacies of the mystery and when things are revealed to you throughout the story that a summary just isn't going to do it. So if you're watching this video in hopes that you don't have to read this book, why? Because you should read it. This is a 5-star series. This was a 5-star book upon reread. So if you haven't read it, I would say you should probably stop here in this video, go and read it, and then come back and see if you agree with my interpretations of what I read in the book, my questions, my themes that I have at the end. I would love to have a discussion with you, but I really don't want you to miss out on reading this amazing story. Throughout this video, you will see me glance at my notes. I did take numerous notes throughout my entire reading process of this the last couple of months, and I have my tabs as I annotated the book as well. But after all of those, I took kind of a summarized version of my notes, and that's what I'm planning on giving you. So if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. I am going to start by giving you guys some background information on the city that we are in. So we are in the city of Nadezhra, and if you guys have a physical copy of this book, there is a map in the beginning of the story that you can see the setup of all of the locations that we visit in the story. So I think that that's important to know. And this city is a Venetian style city. We have 3 separate islands that all make up the city of Nadezhra. And this is the city that has been conquered. And so there are 2 peoples who live within the city and clash within the city. You have the Vrzinians, who are the natives to Nadezhra. Nadezhra is known as their holy city. Vrzinians worship a god called Azarice, and Nadezhra is the home for Azarice's wellspring, which is Azarice's well of power, essentially. Azarice has a dream world, the realm of the dream, and the city of dreams, that if you go into the realm of the dream, the city of dreams actually sits exactly where Nadezhra is, which is why the wellspring is there. So it's a very important location, a religious location to the Vrzinian people. It's very important to them that they can maintain a connection with their god. However, the city of Nadezhra was conquered a very long time ago by the general of the Leganti army, whose name was Caius Rex. Caius Rex came in and wanted to completely obliterate the Vrzinian people and their beliefs. And he did a good job originally of trying to control all Vrzinian-held spaces, including the city of Nadezhra. He went as far as putting a gigantic amphitheater on top of the wellspring to kind kind of try and squelch or eliminate the wellspring itself. It didn't work. The wellspring is alive and well and does make an appearance once every year. Technically, it only makes an appearance once every 7 years for what's called the Great Dream. That actually, the wellspring you can see in reality. Every other year, they have a festival of veiled waters where they celebrate Azarice, and you can go into or view the realm of the dream by taking Aja. And so the wellspring is very much alive and well. Caius Rex did not succeed in that, but he did succeed in limiting access of Virzinians to this holy site. Caius Rex died, and after his death, the Virzinians rushed to the city. They took over all of the other lands that Caius Rex had originally taken over, but the Leganti forces and the Virzinians essentially just clashed for years over Nadezhra. Both sides were exhausted, and they decided to create an accord. Both, including the Virzinian clan leaders and the nobility of the Leganti, came together and made an agreement. The city of Nadezhra would be ruled by the Leganti nobles, but the Virzinians would have access to Azarice and her wellspring on certain days of the year, and they would be able to still reside in the city, and there would be no more war. At least that was the goal. So there are a lot of tensions between these two peoples. You also have people who have been in the city for so long that they are of mixed race and they just consider themselves Nadezhrans. And that's kind of the mixing pot that we're in this story as it begins. Next, we need to get into the actual plot. What we start with in this story is our main character, whose name is Ren. And in the prologue of this, you learn that Ren was originally on the streets as a child. She did not have a lot of money. You learn throughout the story that her mother died at when Ren was very young. And so Ren kind of had to figure things out, and she was taken in by someone whose name is Andrakia and signed into, it's not the appropriate word, but we'll just say that, signed into a knot. And within a knot, you have Andrakia, who was the leader, and she had a whole bunch of what they considered fingers. And those were her stooges, essentially. She sent them out to do certain tasks. A lot of them were children, and they were pickpockets, thieves, con artists. That's what she taught them to do as a person who was in charge of this knot. We learn that Ren also, within this group, within this knot, there are two other fingers whose names are Tess and Sedge, and these are two individuals that Ren considers family. They are considered her sister and her brother. Well, Ren has a little bit of an adventurous streak, likes to come up with her own plans, wanted to be independent of Andrakia, and Andrakia did not like that. She was very cruel to her fingers and would abuse them and make them do things that they didn't necessarily want to do. And one of these times when Ren kind of steps out of line, Andrakia, instead of punishing Ren, she punishes Sedge because she knows that Ren loves Sedge. And Ren believes Andrakia to have killed him. She watches this happen. She is sitting there looking at Sedge's limp body, and they drag him away in order to get Ren to behave. Her and Tess decide to take matters into their own hands and poison Andrakia and get out of the knot. Well, that is of significance because if you are in a knot, you are bound by an oath that you will not betray the knot. Those are supposed to be your family members, and any of the underbelly of the city is not going to trust Ren anymore because of what she did to Andrakia. So she does poison Andrakia. Her and Tess escape, but they have to also leave the city. So that's the prologue. We learn that Ren and Tess ended up setting up shop in a city called Gunlek. And Tess was a seamstress. She worked in creating noble and other clothing. She was very good at it. But unfortunately, Gunlek does have some laws regarding embroidery. You're not supposed to embroider clothing, and anything essentially creative, fashion-wise, was seen as illegal. So eventually, Tess does have to get out of the city because she is wanted. You have Ren, who also went with Tess to Gunluck, who worked as a maid for Latilia Trimentis, who is a noble from Nadezhra. So Ren learns all she can and works for Latilia for a little while. She learns all she can about the Nadezhran nobility because she really wants to go home, and Tess needs to leave the city anyway. So she comes up with a plan, Ren comes up with a plan that she is going to go back to the city of Nadezhra, go to the Trimentis family, which is where Latilia came from, and pretend to be Latilia's daughter. Ren learned in working for Latilia that she is not a great person and that she did leave her family on kind of horrible terms to make a life for herself in Gunluck. She also learned that Latilia really wanted to live in Soteris, which is kind of a city that everyone looks to as the prominent power, where nobility reside, where all of the fashions come from. It's looked up upon as a city, and that's where Latilia was supposed to end up, but she ended up not getting there. But Ren uses this information to come back to the Trimentis family and convince them, or try to convince them, to take her into their register as Latilia's daughter, under the guise that she wants Latilia to come back and reconcile with her family. Ren creates a persona to do this. She calls herself Renata, and it's Renata Verodux. I'll just call her Renata. You have a con artist as our main character, Ren, who does create 3 separate people that she is in this. You have Ren, who is herself. You have Renata, who is the Trimentis noble, or she's trying to become a Trimentis noble. And you have Arenza, who is a Vrzinian Sorsa, who is a patterner, which we'll get to a little bit later. What Ren does not understand when she comes to the Trimentis family trying to get into their register is the fact that the Trimentis family are already in dire straits in several different circumstances. The first is that they only have 3 members of their family on their register. The register is just a list of people that they claim to be family, because that's how the nobility work with Legantes. And they have the matriarch, who is Danni, and she is known to be viciously protective of her family and someone who also holds grudges. You also have her son, Liato, who is her heir and will take over House Trimentis when Danni passes, and her daughter, Juna, who is a little naive, and Danni definitely protects her from the world. She doesn't get to participate in a lot of things. So they're already struggling because they used to have a ton of family members. You learn throughout the story that a lot of those family members have died under weird circumstances or really bad circumstances. And because of that, because of the deaths, because of some choices that Danni's husband has made, they're also in financial crisis. You have a family who has taken out loans from numerous people, and they are now in a situation where they are unable to get a charter. So charters are how the nobility make money. They essentially go to the Chinkarat, who are the Leganti nobles who rule Nadezhra. If the nobles go to the Chinkarat and can get them to give them a charter, those charters could involve, I know one of the charters that we talk about in this is someone wants to create a charter regarding mercenary guards, to actually hire out guards, the noble classes, in order for them to protect materials as they ship them, you know, in various places within the city. You also have a charter that we'll talk about where they are trying to rebuild a powerful Numenat that was destroyed, that creates a cleaning mechanism that cleans the channels of the river in one part of the city. So these are things that the nobility can do to make money. Danni has been denied all of the charters that she has requested. She is desperately seeking for any means to make money. And you also learn that she is, and the Trimentis family in general, are being hunted. I don't know if that's the right word. They are on the chopping block of the Indester family. And the Indester family is part of the Chinkarat, part of the 5 noble families that rule Nadezhra. But they specifically are the noble family that are in the Kairoulet. And the Kairoulet is the military/vigil, which are the police force of Nadezhra. Indesters have an immense amount of power within the city of Nadezhra, and they have used this to buy up the debts of Trimentis, and they are holding that over the Trimentis family's heads. So Ren is coming in asking to be put into the register to try and reconcile her mother with Danni, and she doesn't realize that she's trying to get into a noble family that doesn't have any money. And so her plan is a little flawed from the beginning. Because of the place that the Trimentis family is in, they are very hesitant to accept anyone into their family or trust anyone because everyone's out to get them at this point. And so Danni does make the call to call in Grey Serrato. One of the things that the noble class can do within this series is they can call in the Vigil at their beck and call to do investigations for them. And the Vigil is run by the Kairoulet, so they're run by Indester. So Danni has to be careful with this because she can't just go running to anybody within the Vigil because they could technically report back to Mittori Indester, and she doesn't want that. So she calls in Grey Serrato, who is a Rosinian man who has risen in the ranks of the Vigil to everyone's surprise. The Vigil is usually full of Leganti gentry class, and most of the time they do not hire Rosinians, but he has shown his diligence in wanting to keep his people safe and his city safe, and so he has risen to the role of captain within the Vigil. He's a little irritated that Danni has called him in on this silly little request because he does have some other things that he would rather focus on, but because it is his job, he does investigate Renata. At this point, Renata has made her introductions to Danni, and she now wants to make a big splash in the noble community because she wants to be accepted by the nobles because that makes it more likely that she will be accepted by the Trimentis family. And she does this by going out on, I think it was called the Gloria. It was essentially just a walk where they have a whole bunch of people selling goods, and it's a little bit like a marketplace. So she goes and she's wearing her traditional Sateran garb, which is very, very overstyled. She has her shoulders shown, which is something that they don't do in Nadezhra because they are very old-fashioned there, and definitely catches the eye of a whole bunch of people. One of those people happens to be Darasi Vargo, and Vargo is a crime lord turned good. So everyone knows he has a sordid past. He definitely has some influence within the underbelly of the city and within the lower banks of the city, but he has kind of changed what he has been doing recently and trying to get further and further into the clutches of the noble class. So he definitely has some big dreams, and he sees Renata and thinks that she might be able to help him take a step further into the noble class. During this meeting of Vargo, Ren and Vargo do have a discussion surrounding Nadezhran fashion, because fashion is something that is very much a theme throughout the story, which is why Tess is such an integral role with her amazing seamstress abilities for Renata. But Vargo ends up purchasing for Renata a traditional Nadezhran mask, which will come into play later in the story. We also have Vargo meeting with Ren a little bit later to discuss becoming an advocate for a charter that he wants to fix a numinatria, which is the one that actually keeps the channels of the Nadezhra, the river of Nadezhra, clean. Because currently it is broken. It was broken by an old family member of the Trimentis, and so he's hoping that Renata can convince Trimentis to let her be an advocate for this charter so they can make money. And it also helps Vargo because Vargo lives in the lower banks, which is where this muddy water, the water of the river, is not being cleaned anymore because this numinatria was broken. Ren does convince Danni to allow her to do this. She convinces Danni that Vargo also has a little bit of a beef with Indester, which she learns from Sedge. So as she has been interacting with Vargo, kind of peeking around, trying to figure out who he is, why he's there, because, you know, she wants to know, she wants to make sure that he's not going to be bad for her con, she runs into her brother, who she believed to be dead. And with that connection, she now has even more information on Vargo, and Sedge tells her that Vargo is interested in Indester because there have been some things going on in the lower bank that Vargo's not pleased with. There is a drug called Ash that is being circulated in the lower bank, and Vargo believes Indester to have something to do with it. He's not exactly sure why or what his plans are. There are also some numinatria that have been made in some areas where people have died in the lower banks. And that numinats, or the numinatria, the plurals and how that word is used, I'm not sure I'm using correctly, but that is a magic surrounding geometry and the numen that the Leganti have created. And he finds these symbols within these warehouses where some of his men have died. And he recognizes it as Braconi and Indester's type of magic. There's a whole bunch of people in this that can do numinatria, but they always have kind of a style of writing, and he recognized Braconi's. And so he thinks that Indester has something to do with it, and he does want to investigate. So as Renata tells Danni that Vargo has something to do with Indester, not something to do with, but wants to investigate Indester, Danni believes that maybe this could be beneficial, because if they can figure out or have dirt on Mittori Indester, then she could have a little bit of relief financially. Spurring to a different side of the story, after Renata goes for her walk in the Gloria and meets with Vargo, she also meets with Liato, which is Danni's son. He wants to get to know his cousin a little bit more, and so he invites her out to hang out with some of the younger noble class, and they are going out at night and going to the lower bank, which isn't necessarily a safe place for nobles to be in the evening, but she goes because she wants to get to know Liato. She thinks that maybe Liato can be the person that would convince Danni to accept her and put her into the register, and so she's going to use this as a little bit of a getting to know Liato moment. Little does she know that Liato shows up late, and there are a whole bunch of kind of petty squabbles with the nobles that she's hanging out with. She also learns that Metzen Indester, so it's Mittori Indester's son, is there, and he is just a peach. And I mean that in the most rotten way I possibly can. He is an awful human being. She learns that he has disfigured an actor who insulted him. And it was definitely something that it should not have been dealt with the way that Metzen did, and he didn't care because he's a noble and the person he disfigured is not a noble, and he thinks that he should get whatever he wants. Well, in come the Rook. The Rook is a legendary figure within the city of Nadezhra who has always been against the noble class, and he comes to teach Metzen a lesson. And Renata, who cannot tell everyone that she is actually Ren, she wants to uphold the facade, actually steps in and tries to defend Metzen's honor. So that was her first interaction with the Rook. She has many more interactions with the Rook throughout the story. I won't cover them all, but it's not always Renata. Sometimes it's Arenza, and sometimes eventually it does end up being Ren. So there are a lot of different interactions with this legendary figure, which is why the series is called Rook and Rose. Going back to the walk along the Gloria, we also have her encounter Gray Serrato, who we know is investigating Renata, trying to figure out what her play is, why she's messing with Danni. And Gray, I did mention he is frustrated by the fact that he is having to investigate Renata, and that is because he is also investigating the disappearance of some children and the deaths of some children. He has been investigating this for months. There have been children that go missing, and when they come back, they cannot sleep, and inevitably they die of exhaustion. And he doesn't know why this is happening. He is trying to figure out where these children are going, who is responsible, and he runs into a lot of different characters trying to figure out this mystery. One of the characters he happens to run into is Arcady Bones, who is such a fantastic character. Arcady is a 12-year-old leader of her own knot. She takes care of essentially all of the children within the Undercity. And so she has her own organization that she investigates. A lot of the children who have gone missing are the ones that were in her knot, or ones that, like, kids that she knew about within the city. And she essentially tells Gray that there is a figure called Gammer Lindworm who is taking these children and feeding their dreams to the Zleeslin, which are also figures of lore. They are a Brazilian nightmare, something that parents used to use to scare their kids into going to sleep and acting good. They had some thoughts around, I think it was a red ring. If you put a red ring around your bed, the Zleeslin can't get to you at night and they can't steal your dreams. They're essentially creatures of nightmare. And so Gray doesn't really take this with anything. He takes it with a grain of salt because it's clearly an imaginary figure, and Arcady tells him that he's an idiot. In his investigation of Renata, he's a little bit more successful and actually does find that Renata is having some financial issues. She has a line of credit out, and that line of credit is supposed to tie back to someplace in Saterin, but they can't actually figure out who is supposed to be providing this money for her. And so he goes to this information with Danni, which, you know, makes her even more suspicious of Renata and makes Ren's job a lot harder. You also have a backstory with Gray. He is suffering from a loss of his own. He lost his brother not that long ago in a fire in the city, and he is trying to figure out who is responsible for it. And so he's doing that on the sidelines. He has a lot of investigations going on. Going back to Renata, we have Renata going full force trying to get this charter approved by the noble class. And she has to do some maneuvering to make sure this happens. When she goes to Quietus, which is one of the nobles in the Chinkarat, he tells her that if she can get the saltpeter shipment that he has coming in removed from this essentially hold that it has, that he will give her the charter that she wants. She does a massive amount of maneuvering of a whole bunch of people in order to eventually get this saltpeter released for Quietus, and he does grant her the charter. In the midst of all of this, she becomes rather known by a lot of the noble class, and so she does get an invitation to Metzen and Marvisel's engagement party, which is kind of the talk of the town. She has to go, and lots of things happen at this party. First, and I just have to mention this, it doesn't have really a lot of bearing on the story, but Renata meets Peabody, who is Vargo's pet spider. Just have to mention him real quick. Renata also meets Tanaquis, which is going to be a very important person for the later half of this book. She's an astrologer, but she also studies birth charts and inscriptions and numinatria. She is a genius and kind of a little bit of an odd duck. Tanaquis is friends with Danni and makes it a little bit harder for Ren to tell all of her lies. Within this party, Metzen and Duster ends up insulting Juna, Liato's sister, and Liato steps in and duels Metzen and wins, which causes this huge uproar within noble society. It was definitely something that the Trimentis didn't need in their everyday life. They didn't want to upset Induster any more than they already were. And so as they're walking out of the party, we do have one of the noble women, Fiella Cascanum, who has earlier had a conversation with Renata about Tess's seamstress skills and seems to really have enjoyed Renata's company, comes to the Trimentis' rescue and essentially shows everyone at the party that the Trimentis are not to be shunned in noble society. The Trimentis do still leave the party, which actually ends up helping Ren in the long run because she goes and changes into a maid's costume and goes and investigates Indester herself. She ends up in his study and she runs into the Rook. They find a note that essentially is tying to a fire, a warehouse that happened, which we know is the fire that killed Gray's brother Kolya. And the Rook is interested in it. So we now have a tie between the Rook and Kolya. And we don't necessarily know why he's investigating this, if it's just because it was caused by Indester, who is a noble. We're not sure. Shortly after this engagement party, we also have a meeting between Vargo and Indester. And Vargo is really wanting a charter of his own. He can't currently have one because he is not a noble and only nobles can get charters. He wants to set up a mercenary guard. So he wants to be able to loan out some of his men to protect shipments of the noble class. And currently he cannot do that. That is illegal. So he is having a meeting with Indester. Indester thinks that he can help Vargo out, but he wants Vargo to do something for him. He needs Renata to show up at the Accord. The Accord is a night where they celebrate the original accord between the Vrzinian leaders and the Chinkarat. And usually it's a closed event. I think it still is because he has to invite her. But he gives Vargo an invitation to give to Renata and poses it as he needs her to do it, and Vargo could convince Renata in any way that he sees fit. And Vargo agrees. He doesn't have any idea what Indester wants with Renata. He has some trepidation about giving Indester what he wants because he doesn't trust him, but it does give Vargo what he wants. So he goes along with it anyway. On the night of the Accords, we have Renata taking Liato with her to the Accords. She had 2 tickets, and so she gave Liato one of them. And it's not an event that a lot of nobles get to see. And so it is very exciting. It was, going to be this big party where they're celebrating the founding of Nadezhra. And Liato and Ren get dosed with ash. Ash is a perversion of Aja, and instead of making people see dreams, it makes them see nightmares. And because Ren was was conceived on the night of the Great Dream, she actually can go into Azurice's dream if she is given ash bodily. So her entire being goes into the dream, and she essentially takes everyone in the charter house with her, including the noble class and including Liato. They are everyone in the charter house, so the nobles, the Vrzinians, the clan leaders, they were all there for the Accords. Well, they end up in their own nightmares all across Nadezhra. Ren realizes where she's at, and she uses her skills with pattern to kind of work her way through these nightmares. She does run into Liato, and he goes along with her to try and escape the dream. Well, while she's trying to escape, they do run into Andrakia, the one that she poisoned and she thought she killed. But Andrakia has changed in her looks, and she also has a whole bunch of the Zlizin surrounding her. And Liato protects Ren. He uses his sword skills to protect Renata and allow her to be able to escape via the wellspring. But in the meantime, he ends up getting hurt, and inevitably the Zlizin kill him while Renata is escaping. The Rook is actually the one who pulls Ren out of the wellspring, and he tries to go in for Liato, but ends up not being able to save him. And Ren's mask is essentially gone. She is dressed like a Vrzinian. She looks like Renata. So the Rook knows her secrets. In the aftermath of the Night of Hells, which is what they deemed the night of the Accords after this event, we have a mass war almost breaking out within the town because the Verzinians who were there to celebrate the night witnessed their clan leaders being attacked and having these horrible nightmares. One of them was killed. You have the noble class that is very confused because they see the same things. All of their Chinkarat were sent into the nightmares. None of them were killed. The only noble who was killed was Liato. Tanaquis, the astrologer, was put in charge of the investigation because this is a religious matter, because it deals with the Aja's dream and the wellspring. And her investigation is rather thorough, and Ren lies because she doesn't want to give away the fact that it was her fault. Not her fault because she didn't dose herself with ash, but she feels guilty because she pulled all those people into the dream. You also have an investigation by Gray because he is the only, or one of the only, Verzinian Hawks or Verzinian Vigil members. He does go and try and investigate the Stadnim and Duski, which is a radical Verzinian class, and they think that maybe they had something to do with dosing everyone with ash. We also learn that after the Night of Hells, Renata can't sleep. So she has been inflicted with the same thing that is happening to the missing children around the town. Due to the fact that Renata can't sleep, things get harder and harder for her. She is trying to hold up the con, but she is completely exhausted and she's trying to figure out what to do. Inevitably, she goes to Danni for help, and Danni reaches out to Tanaquis because, as we've said earlier, she is a genius and she can figure things out. And Tanaquis decides to use an experimental numinatria. And they don't know if this will work. What Tanaquis believes is that part of Renata's soul is stuck in Ajura's dream, and so her body believes her to be dreaming, which is why it won't let her body actually sleep. Vargo is the one, because of things of his own devising, he essentially comes up with some weird reasoning for why he should be the one to help Renata. He is the one who ends up going into the realm of the dream using the numinatria that Tanaquis creates in order to pull Ren out. He does find out as he's in the dream that she does have connections to Pattern, which is odd for a noble Citaran woman. After Ren is cured of her sleeplessness, she goes to Sedge about Androkia. Because of all of the things that have gone on, she doesn't know if what she saw with Androkia was real or if it was actually a nightmare. And she did recognize the location of Androkia in the dream, and she convinces Sedge to go with her to check it out. They do find Zlizin blood all over these depth catacomb things that they're walking through. No one wants to go near it because of the smell and kind of the vibe that you get from the Zlizin blood. And they find cages that have housed children. They also find Androkia. Androkia has vowed vengeance upon Ren for taking her beauty and life, because we learn that the poison did in fact kill Androkia, but she saved herself by drinking Zlizin blood. And so she has become kind of this hideous figure that has to live in the dream world and wants her life back. In the meantime, we have tension growing between the Verzinians and the Leganti because no one has figured out what caused the Night of Hells, and there has been no one to blame for the deaths that occurred. We also have someone instigating the riots and making it worse by taking a Dreamweaver, which is a sacred animal to the Verzinians, and putting it in the Labyrinth's heart, which is one of their religious locations. Now, Ren sees who does this, and they are connected to Metzen and Dester and Berkoni and Dester, and they are talking about putting numinatria all over the city to do certain things, and she doesn't quite know what. When riots actually broke out in the city, it was very clear that there were certain parts of the city that were impacted by emotional numinatria, and so these things were making people mad, making people go after one another, and it became very dangerous. We learn then that Vargo has the ability to inscribe Numenatria and actually goes out and fixes a lot of the city. You also have kind of a three-pronged defense against these city riots. So you have Vargo dealing with the Numenatria, you have Ren, who is going to the noble class and asking them to try and placate the Versinians by giving them something. She does eventually convince them to give Versinians access to the amphitheater without payment this year. And then we also have Gray, who has gone to the Stadnum and Duski and convinced them to stop the riots because they're being used by Mittori and Dester. Gray knows this because of a sequence of events involving Arenza. So there are a lot of things at play in this story. It's hard for me to give you a linear progression of events. So I'm going to go back a little bit. We have Liato, who is trying to investigate Kolya's death and has learned through many hours of investigation that there is a Versinian woman named Iduza who might have something to do with it. Iduza is a known member of the Stadnum and Duski, which is a radical class of Versinians who want Nedezra completely in ownership of Versinians. They do not want to share their holy city with Leganti, and they are going to use radical means to get there. And Ren finds this out, decides to go and pretend to be Arenza, a Sorsa who can use pattern, which is the magic of Versinians, to kind of show you a pattern of your life. It's going to be your past, your present, and your future. Think kind of tarot cards. And she does a pattern for Liato. He is describing to her Iduza, and she offers to help. She tells him that she will go and find Iduza since she is a member of the Versinian clan. Iduza might actually speak with her, whereas Liato, being a noble, is probably not going to be able to get that information. And she tells him that she's going to tell Iduza to go to Gray because Liato has talked to Gray about helping with this investigation. She does go to Iduza. Iduza does go to Gray, and Gray and Liato find out that Mittori and Dester has been sleeping with Iduza, and they have been in cahoots with one another. Well, because nothing is ever simple, Iduza believes Metzen to be on the Stadnum and Duski side, and that she wants, or that Metzen wants, the Versinians to have power over the city of Nedezra, when in reality Metzen has been using her to essentially help the noble class with their plan and blame Stadnum and Duski for all of the chaos that's going on. So through those events, that's why Gray was able to go to the Stadnum and Duski and convince them to stop the riots, because he didn't want them to be Mittori and Dester's pawn. Unfortunately, all of these things came a little too late and a little too little, because a portion of the Stadnum and Duski group breaks off from the people who are okay with quelling the riots, and they decide that they're going to use the saltpeter that we talked about with Quientus, the one that Renata used to get the charter. She helps Iduza take the saltpeter and give it to the Stadnum and Duski. Well, now the radicalized members of the Stadnum and Duski have taken that and created bombs and have put them all over the amphitheater. There was some notifications going out from the Stadnum and Duski to tell the Versinians to stay away from the amphitheater and boycott the amphitheater. And the radicalized group essentially is like, anyone who shows up deserves to be killed. Well, the problem with that now is the noble class has agreed to give all Versinians free access to the amphitheater, and so there's going to be a ton of people there. What we learn is that Mittori and Dester is working with Andrakia. So Andrakia is creating ash by using Zlizin blood, and the ash can be used to enter the realm of the dream. Mittori needed Ren on the Night of Hells because she is conceived on the Great Dream, the night of the Great Dream, and so she can actually go into Azarias' dream, and he wants that access because he wants to bring the wellspring into reality so he can destroy it. it's a very simplified version of what happens, or what he wants to have happen. Matori and Duster wants this to happen because he is essentially the modern day Caius Rex. He is super racist, doesn't want anything to do with Fresenians, and wants them out of his city. Andrakia is working with Matori because she believes that he will help her get her beauty back, which I think is a little silly on her part, but she definitely believes that he's going to help her come back to herself once again. Due to the fact that Matori needs someone who was conceived on the night of the Great Dream, he has Andrakia kidnap Ren, and he himself goes after Arcady Bones because both of them end up being, or were conceived on the night of the Great Dream. He only needs one of them, but he just has a backup plan. He has had his kind of stooge, Berkoni, do a numinatria inside the realm of the dream using ash. And this numinatria is going to bring the wellspring, or it's going to harm the wellspring. The wellspring is the focus of the numinatria. It's where the power of the numinatria is going to come from, the wellspring. And if they have Arcady or Ren and they push them in the wellspring, it will make things work to where the wellspring will be destroyed and the power will be taken from the wellspring. So all of this is happening while there are bombs at the amphitheater. There are people who are coming to the amphitheater to celebrate Azarice's dream and be able to partake in Aja and the worship of Azarice. And it's all chaos because they can't see what's going on. Only people who have taken ash or taken Aja, I guess, can see the dream world. And so they don't know that there is a numinatria and the wellspring and all this crazy stuff going on inside. And we have all of our characters show up at this point. Vargo shows up because he knows that there's a numinatria, because Tanaquis has come to him after doing her investigation of the Night of Hells. She finds this giant numinatria in the amphitheater over the wellspring and goes to Vargo for help because he does inscriptions. So he goes and is trying to dismantle this giant numinatria, which is very dangerous for him. He's being constantly he's fighting the Zlizan that are within the realm of the dream as well. We also have the Rook showing up, who is fighting off Matori, while Ren shows up to try and fight off Andrakia and save Arcady Bones. And I mean, the last scenes were just absolutely nuts. You also have Ren showing up, not as Ren, but the Rose. So as she is in the dream, she needs a mask because there are people within the dream like Vargo, and she sees Serato who would know who she is, and she doesn't want to let her ruse up. So she does ask Azarice if she can have a disguise, and it creates the Rose from the mask that Vargo bought her at the very beginning of the book. In the end, they do end up killing Andrakia by turning her Zlizan against her, and Matori gets knocked out by the Rook. Vargo is desperately injured, and Sedge has also been there trying to fight off the Zlizan, but all of them are saved with the exception of Andrakia, who was killed by the Zlizan by either Ren, who is the Rose, or the Rook. And so they leave. Everyone realizes what Matori and Duster was doing, that he was trying to destroy the wellspring, and the Rook ends up taking him to the Verzinian clan leaders to figure out what to do with him. They decide to execute him, and the nobles of the Leganti nobles of the Chinkarat can't do anything about it because they couldn't negotiate with him. That was why the Rook ended up taking him, because they were worried that if they left him with the noble class, he would essentially just get a slap on the wrist and they would push it underneath a rug and no one would ever hear about it again. So because they couldn't do that, they did have to acknowledge what Matori was doing, and the entire Chinkarat takes his nobility from him, denies that he is a noble anymore, and essentially strikes their register from the noble class. So all of the Indester family is no longer noble, and all of their assets have been taken by the Chinkarat and distributed amongst the people who were hurt by what Matori was trying to do. Because of this, Indester was the leading person within the Kai Roulette, and they had to replace that person. They replace him with Acrinix, who somehow has a tie to Vargo, because Vargo becomes a noble via Acrinix. So Acrinix comes up, his first ruling as the Kai Roulette is to allow Durrasi Vargo to become a noble. We don't really know why. Through some noble gossip that Ren runs into, she does learn that Vargo sold her out to Indester, and so now she doesn't know if she can trust him and why he would have done that, what his plans are for the nobilities. She's definitely got her eye on him. She also learns that Vargo might have had something to do with the fires that caused Serato's brother's death. And she tells the Rook that, because the Rook, she knows, is investigating Kolya's death. We see at the very end of the book that the Rook is Grey Serato, and so we now know that he is hunting for the killer of his own brother. At the very, very last page of the story, you do have Ren spying on Vargo, talking to someone that she can hear. So something I haven't talked about in the summary is the fact that Vargo throughout the entire story has someone in his head talking to him. And we don't know who it is, but he has traditionally only been heard by Vargo. No one else can hear him. All of a sudden, Ren can hear him. And that's where the story ends. So I'm going to go straight into the questions that I'm assuming you guys still have, and I'm not going to answer them. I'm just going to say these are what we're looking forward to moving into book 2. First off, we need to know who the voice is. Who is the voice in Vargo's head? We would like to know. We also want to know a whole bunch of things about Vargo. How and why is Vargo working with Acrinix? Because it seemed like a little bit of a contentious relationship. Didn't seem like he really wanted to be working with him. It was just kind of a means to an end. We also don't know much about Vargo's history. We know that he has a sordid history, but we don't know how he came to power and how he knows everything that he does. Why is he so good at Numenatria? Who taught him that? So we'll find that out in the second book. We also need to figure out who cursed the Trimentis family. That was a short little story that happened. I didn't put it in the summary because it wasn't super important, but it will be in coming books. So keep your eye on that. We don't know who or why the Trimentis was cursed. And we also don't know why Renata was included in that curse. Speaking of Renata, we also don't know who the rose is. How was it created? Was it Azure Ice that gave her this power? What does the power entail? What type of responsibility does Ren have now that she has this power? And then finally, we need to figure out whether or not Ren's gonna cut and run. There's a lot of people who know more about Ren than she really is comfortable with knowing, including the Rook, who she doesn't know who it is because she thought it was Vargo, but the Rook was with Vargo in the, by the wellspring. And then she also thought it was Liato, but Liato's dead. So we know that it's Grey. She doesn't. And so we don't know whether or not she's going to go with Tess and cut and run, or if she's going to stay and really try and, work her con. Hello, everyone, and welcome from future Danni, although I guess it's past Danni for you. But I ended up wanting to film the second half of this video over again. I think that filming all of the summary and all of the little intricacies that I wanted to talk about it's just a little bit too much to film in one day. And so I wanted to give the second half of the video another shot before I actually released it to you guys, because I just want to give this book justice because I think it deserves it. So I am here, that's why I look different, to talk to you guys about the favorites, like my favorite scenes. I'm going to give you guys 5 of my favorite scenes, and then I'm also going to give you guys the themes and things that I picked up on in the book, and along with some quotes that I really enjoyed in the story. So we'll start with my favorites, and the first one that came to mind whenever I was thinking about what I wanted to share with you guys actually occurred while I was reading it. I ran across this really cute scene of when Vargo is at, I'm pretty sure it's the engagement party of Metzen and Marvisel, and he has Peabody with him, and Peabody's like super excited to see Ren, and he just has a really cute engagement with Wren about Peabody. So let me read you this little section. It was also the gaudiest spider she'd ever seen in her life, a king peacock, the emblem of the Rosinian Viridi clan. She heard about them, but never seen one. That is quite eccentric of you. Do you call him Peabody because of the peacock coloration? No, it's because he was about the size of a pea when I got him. Vargo tried to coax Peabody back into the shadows of his collar, but the spider was having none of it. He was turning about and continued to wave his legs at Renata in a complex pattern that was probably very appealing to lady spiders. Stop flirting, you old reprobate, before someone sees you and decides you need to be smooshed. And then Renata comes on to essentially say how odd it is to hear Vargo say something like smooshed to a spider. And I think it's a very cute scene that shows a little bit of warmth in Vargo's character. It adds a little complexity to the questioning of, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? What does he have up his sleeve? I really liked that moment. It endeared Vargo to me. To kind of switch gears to a little bit more of a crass moment, which I won't read you the exact quote because of that. But I have to talk about Arcady Bones. So she is such a small character in this first book, but she is very pivotal to the plot and pivotal to certain things that are happening within the story. And I want to talk about the moment when Arcady ends up getting arrested after the Night of Hells, and the Vigil and Rosinians are already on high, like there's high tension, and she ends up getting put into a prison cell, and Gray finds out about it, goes to get her out, and has issues getting her out, is walking her out of the Vigil, and is like almost there, and Matori and Duster walks in and essentially shuts down everybody and orders people about, trying to figure out, essentially ordering that the clans are not allowed to leave Nadezra because he believes the clans are to blame for a noble's death in the Night of Hells, for dosing him and blah, blah, blah. So the Vigil essentially falls over backwards to ensure him that things will get done. And as Gray is walking out with Arcady, she essentially says in worse terms that the Hawks wear brown uniforms because they are shoved so far up of Matori's butt that they can't help but be that color. And I love the fact that she is in this really, like, obviously she's safe in that moment because they had left Matori's earshot, but she's still in a pretty high pressure situation and she just doesn't care. She's like, nope, you all need to figure your crap out because this is ridiculous and you guys are bowing down to someone who is absolutely ludicrous. I love Arcady for that. The fact that she speaks her mind regardless of, she does have her moments of understanding that speaking in the moment is probably not the best thing, but she definitely toes a line of wanting to be honest, and she's going to say whatever she wants to say, and then also, protecting herself in that way as well. The next scene is one that is very bittersweet to me in my heart, and that is the scene where Liato forgives Ren. So we have Renata and Liato going to the Tartar house on the night of the Accords, and they both get dosed with a double dose of ash. And because Ren is or was conceived on the Great Dream, she can pull people into the dream with her, pulls everyone in, including Liato, and they are essentially in the nightmare world. She finds Liato, and she does tell him, because of some of the things that are going on in the nightmare, she tells him the truth, that she is not a noble. And I really love what he says to her. In this nightmare, Ren is essentially living her own hell. She has become the Androkia to the Trimentis family, and Liato pulls her out of it, telling her that it's a dream, and is trying to get her to move along and let's, make headway and actually make our way through. And he's trying to convince her, and at one point he says, because whatever lies you've told, what you've done for my family is real, and we may not shed blood to add people to our register, but that doesn't mean someone can't earn a place among us if they try. It was very simple, but I think that it meant a lot to her. She even says he wasn't forgiving her either, not that easily, but he was offering her a chance to earn it. And I think that moment, well, we know that moment really stuck with Ren, and she refused to, like, for instance, when Danni told her that she was going to get accepted into the register, she wouldn't do it until she could solve Liato's murder and bring justice to him. And I think this moment is one reason why she made that choice. Another more silly moment that stood out to me was the moment when we have Renata not sleeping. This is after the Night of Hells, and Tess and Sedge have done everything in their power to make sure that Renata is taken care of and that her secret is safe. And because of this, Sedge has had to have a lot more to do with Renata than he typically would as one of Vargo's minions, and he has had to kind of make up some fibs. One of them, Vargo came to the conclusion himself, and Sedge just kind of went with it, and that was that Sedge had a little bit of a crush on Tess, and that's why he was spending so much time helping Ren and Tess. And there's a moment, I think it might be right before they meet up with Tannquist to do the experimental pneumonatria to put Vargo into the dream. And Sedge and Tess are in the same room with Vargo, and Sedge has to make eyes at Tess. Oh, it was so hilarious, the fact that it was painful to watch, and I really enjoyed that kind of camaraderie between them, but also Sedge just kind of taking one on the chin for the team. He does the same thing whenever they are trying to convince Iduza that Arenza is a proper Sorsa, and he ends up having to, like, eat worms. The trio, all of them together, what they do for each other throughout the book, I mean, it's all amazing, but those are a couple of moments that stood out to me. The last event that I want to talk to you guys about is really a culmination of events, but I'll mention one particular scene. So when the Rook has gotten really upset after the Night of Hells, he pulled Renata out dressed as a Vrzinian, kind of knows who she is and the fact that she's playing multiple games, and he goes to her house and calls her on it while she is not being able to sleep, and so she obviously let some things slip that she didn't intend to let slip. Well, after that, he kind of realizes that maybe he came after her a little too hard and sends her the Vrzinian Shaw, and he asks her to come and meet him. This is when him and her essentially gang up and go to the print shop to see what the Stadium and Dusky are up to. And the scene I'm talking about, the one that I think is really pivotal to their relationship, is the one where Ren goes there early, wearing the shawl that he gave her, and she's kind of casing out the joint. And she finds a hiding space that's kind of up in the rooftops, climbs up there with, you know, not the amount of grace that she probably had as a child when she did this for a living. She even talks about, like, being a little bit out of practice. And she sits there and waits for him, and he still ends up sneaking up on her and essentially tells her that she stole his spot. The banter between the two of them, the kind of caution on Renata's part here, because he now knows her secrets and she has no idea. There's an amount of trust that she has to give him because she doesn't have a choice. He knows everything, and he could go and spill if he wanted to. And so she talks about how, like, the power dynamic has changed, and she doesn't have the power over him that she once did because he now has all of this information about her and she still doesn't know anything about him. And I really liked that scene. I liked the conversation they had. I liked the fact that he doesn't just want her to be a distraction for him. He wants her to hunt with him and kind of become this this companion that he can have help him with his mission, which, you know, as we know now, is the start of the Rose and the Rook and the Rose's relationship throughout the rest of the series. Moving on now to just some themes that I saw within this book, and I am not going to do this justice just because of how large the book is, but I will try my best to give you the ones that I just think are monumental to the series. The first one is cultural differences and origins of cultures, I guess. So within this book, we have Virginians, Leganti, Nadezhrins, Saterans. We have all of these people who are in this the city of Nadezhra that's kind of become a little bit of a melting pot, but a melting pot with a little bit of oil and water that don't mix. And so you have all of these different things that I think make the peoples of the nation seem real. We have these little tiny traditions that we learn about. With the Virginians specifically, we have a lot that we learn about them because Ren is our main character, but we hear a lot about their braids and how longer hair and beaded hair is very important to them. Even in the growing up, like the motherhood and fatherhood, they take care of their children and eventually they give them their beads. There's also their heritage regarding Azarice and her children and the clans and how they have this. One of the things I found really interesting about their family dynamics is the Shah that she ended up losing when her mother passed. And that was, her connection to her family. I think that it was very interesting, the parallels between Virginians and Leganti, because Virginians, it was very much, at least I feel, about blood. I mean, they also have, friends and people who are not blood related to them, but it was about having a clan, having a people that you come from. Whereas Legantis, they are more focused on, at least within the noble class of the Legantis, they're focused on who is going to be best serving to the family. Whereas I feel like in Virginian's culture, it's more about what the clans can do for the people, like in the family, if that makes sense. It's like backwards. With the Legantis, they sign people into registers, so it's not about blood at all. And so I found that to be a really interesting parallel between the differences in those two cultures. We also have the two different types of magics in the system. Really, there were three, but the main ones, we have pattern, which is a Virginian. I don't want to say that it's wholly theirs, but it is their god, their it's their god's power, their god's, I guess, blessing. That's the word I was looking for, to give someone the sight of pattern. And then with Legantis, you have Lumen and the Numenatria, which in the end, and I'll talk about this in a different theme that I'm going to talk about, they are connected in a way as well. So the differences in culture, the origin stories of these people, and then of course the Nadezhrins who are living amongst all of them, and to see like what cultures are adapted, which ones they gravitate towards, which celebrations they go to. It was all very interesting. Something else regarding culture and origins is this feeling of belonging or not belonging that I think is prevalent in a lot of our characters within this story. You of course have Renata Arenza, who is living 3 different lives, and even more, really. She shows a different face to everyone that she meets, with the exception of maybe Tess and Sedge. And she does have these really impactful moments throughout the story of feeling that loss of herself, feeling that separation, and the fact that she can't wholeheartedly be who she wants to be because she has these other elements that she doesn't want to lose. One such moment was when her and Liato are at this fair, and Liato hands her a piece of food on a stick that she is accustomed to, but she can't let him know. And this is what it says. She knew what was in the reed before she touched it, the scent curling around her like a blanket. She closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the aroma ease the self-disgust that shook her at Cetreco's words. He didn't know her, didn't know what she was doing. If he did, he'd likely applaud her for pulling one over on the cheese eaters. But when she opened her eyes and found Liato watching eagerly for her reaction, it was hard to recall why she should take pride in that. And that's regarding, there was someone that she used to know in, I think they're in Lacewater, which is where she is from. And there was someone that ran into her dressed as Renata and was upset at the fact that she was a noble in their area and says something rude to her. And so she had to address that as someone with noble blood did, or like at least react to it in that way. And so she is saying that, you know, if he knew that she was running this con on Liato, that person would be happy for what she's doing. But in that same moment, when she has this like defensive nature about, I'm doing what you would do, she also has this moment of, but do I want to? Like, is that really who I want to be? Looking at Liato and seeing, you know, the golden retriever-ness of Liato. So I think that moment really shows her wanting to belong to both worlds and being torn. Another moment that I think really shows the wanting to belong, wanting to have something to belong to, as well as the clash of cultures that are happening within Nadezhra, is the walk along the rotunda. Specifically, a moment between Renata, Vargo, and Gray, where Vargo is looking at a mask that Renata is drawn to, and he tells her the mask is Nadezhran. And Renata doesn't obviously know what that means because she's Sateran. Obviously Ren does, and so she has to kind of make sure that she doesn't say anything that would give the game away. And she asks for an explanation, and that explanation ends up getting the group into a bit of a tiff. So this is what Vargo ends up saying. The mask is Nadezhran because the Dreamweaver bird is a symbol of the city. They flock here every spring to mate, and we celebrate the festival of Veiled Waters. Versinian because the Versinian people say they're descended from those birds, so they flock here as well. A muscle jumped in Serato's jaw, but he said nothing to correct the inaccuracy or half-veiled insult in Vargo's description. Versinians did not consider Dreamweavers their ancestors, but a symbol of one. And so we have Vargo, who is clearly trying to get a little bit of a rise out of Gray, and a little bit, I think he doesn't necessarily do it because he wants to show that he's better than Gray by any means, but I think he does it because he likes to put people off kilter. He likes to make people feel uncomfortable. But you have Gray not immediately rising to the bait because he is supposed to be part of the vigil and be able to interact with people in an appropriate manner and not defend his culture, even though he obviously wants to. So I think that's a really good mix of wanting to belong to something, but also like wanting to be true to yourself as well. I really liked that moment. The next moment that I want to kind of connect to this is the moment when Ren is walking through the Labyrinth's heart, reflecting on her past and also, you know, what she's going through right now. And the kind of lore behind the Labyrinth's heart as well. Let me just read you the moment and then we'll discuss. So this says, when Ren was a child, her mother had hung a small thread labyrinth above her bed to trap bad dreams. Walking the path here was supposed to trap misfortune, giving one chance to leave it behind. What misfortune it trapped depended on which deity one made offerings to. Ren was trying to leave everything behind. She walked with slow steps, timing her breathing to them. How long had it been since she'd done this? Years, but she wasn't sure how many. There were no labyrinths in Gunluck, and Andrakya had mocked any finger who went to one. Not since Mama died, Ren thought. She'd done it for Avrenia, because she could do nothing else. Not afford a cremation in anything other than a mass bonfire. Not dance the canina for her to let the ancestors know that she had passed. The way that the Karilli in the plaza had gathered to do. A Versinian could make offerings alone, could walk a labyrinth alone, but some parts of their faith required a community, and she'd had none. I love that moment. I love the reflection of what she's doing now, the fact that she needs a community now, and what she's lost in the past. The fact that she had no one when her mother passed, and that was kind of why she got into the situation with Andrakya that she did. And she feels she wanted to be, in that moment with her mother passing, she wanted to be a member of a clan, a member of the Versinian people, but her mother had been shunned because of her. And in this moment, she feels like she needs a community, but who does she pick? She wants to leave everything behind. She isn't so concerned about the Khan at this moment because she is in peril. She's almost going to die, but she still wants a community. I don't know. I really liked that moment in time. That probably should have been in one of my favorite moments, but I knew I was going to mention it here. Moving on to some other themes that I noticed throughout the story. One of them is the lore, and I'll just mention it really quick, but I really like when a story digs into origins, which I already kind of talked about with culture, with the belief system of the Leganti with Caius Rex, and the belief system of the Versinian people with Azurais. And I shouldn't say Caius Rex. Caius Rex was a general, but they have the Lumen, and they have the Leganti have different beliefs as well. But with lore, I'm talking more like old, sorry, if you guys hear Andy, he's like meowing next to me. So when I'm talking lore, I'm talking like old folklore, like bedtime stories. And the Zlizlin and Gammer Lindworm are like the perfect representation of this. I love those stories, especially because there are a lot of bits in this book that talk about how the Versinian parents of old would tell their kids that they needed to, go to bed and act well, so these Zlizin and Gammer didn't come for them in their sleep. And they even had like little rituals that would protect their kids from the Zlizin. And now we know why that those things actually exist. And then we also have the lore surrounding the Rook, the fact that he's been around for centuries, and we are starting a new lore with the Rose. And so we're going to get to see that develop throughout the next two books as well. I really like those pieces where there's so many people who know these names, who are familiar with their stories, but maybe have different experiences with them. And I like how that comes into play in this book. Another theme, and one that I know has gotten this book a lot of attention this year, and that is high fantasy. If you guys aren't participating in our fantasy bingo, this is one of the prompts for our fantasy bingo this year, is to pick a book that has high fashion, or I think I said high fantasy, high fashion. It's to pick a book that has high fashion in it. And this definitely does. We have Tess, who is a seamstress, and we have all of these different costumes and things that are happening throughout the book that are so important. And I find it fascinating. I love the fact that we are not only using this as a con, with Renata dressing up as a Brazilian Sorsa, and then also dressing up as a Satyran noble, but we also have the costumes of the festivals that they have, and like on the night of Veiled Waters, when she's dressed up as Azurais' dream, or Azurais' the wellspring. There's like all these different little moments throughout this book where we're talking about fashion, and it's in such a meaningful way. It's always used for a reason. We even have Vargo dressing up very scantily because, once again, he wants to make people feel very uncomfortable. So one of the moments I wanted to share with you guys was about Gunluck, because I find Gunluck a very interesting part of Ren and Tess's history. So Renata is in a shop with Liato, and she almost gets caught because the Gunluck is mentioned, and she essentially says, Gunluck is the land where one can utter the phrase illegal embroidery ring with a straight face. They still have luxuries there in clothing and otherwise. They merely keep them hidden with reversible garments and secret panels easily tucked away when in public. And Tess comes to her rescue to cover up the fact that Renata, who is Satyran, would know anything about Gunluck. But I really liked that little tiny piece, the little glimpse of Gunluck, and the fact that Tess is a known criminal, someone who is running from the law because she has been caught embroidering beautiful garments in Gunluck for the nobles. I really liked that aspect of high fashion, because obviously it's something that is sought out in Nadezhda. People want there to be embroidery. They want these beautiful outfits that a lot of them come from Sateran fashion. And then you have this completely different culture that we're not really immersed in, but we're getting little glimpses of their past that's just completely reversed. And I found that very fun. I have 2 more themes for you guys and then I swear I'm done. So the next one I want to talk about is grief. This book is just filled with little moments of grief, but I want to specifically focus on the deaths that we have in this book. Even one of them happens to be a fake death, but it wasn't at the time, and that is Sedge. That's how we start this book out. We learn that Andrakya killed Tess and Renata's brother, and Renata holds a lot of guilt for that. And so she is dealing with this grief, with having to, or not really having to, but having put her brother and sister in circumstances that could have potentially harmed them. And it's definitely shaped how she reacts to things, how protective she is of them, and how close guarded she is with everyone else because she wants to protect what's hers. So we start the book with that. We also, throughout the story, learn about the Traimentus family and how they have lost so much. Not only Latilia leaving, which that wasn't a death, but it it essentially could have been one since she struck her name, or her name was struck off the registry or whatever. But we also have Danaya's husband passing, and a lot of their cousins have passed. You know, their registry is down to 3. And then, of course, in the middle of this book, we have Liato's death, which was just heartbreaking. To see both Danaya and Juna have to deal with that. And Juna kind of had to take care of her mother in that moment, which is very much a role reversal for the 2 of them. But it was lovely to see Juna kind of step up in that. But there was a moment in time where they even talked about how Juna was putting aside her mourning in order to give her mother time to mourn the loss of her son. There was a really meaningful moment when Liato passed. It was after the funeral, and Ren ends up going to the Traimentus Manor to talk to Danaya and Juna and mourn with them. And she walks up to their house, and this is her observation. Kolbrun was wearing black when he answered the door. Renata wasn't. She didn't own anything black, and as neither a member nor a servant of House Traimentus, nothing was required of her to change into Nanat's color. But when Juna came out to greet her in full mourning, all Ren could hear was Liato's voice, reciting the litany of the family he'd lost. Of course, the Traimentus owned mourning clothes. They'd had constant need of them. So Ren has a moment of reflection on this family that she has kind of become a part of, that they have been through so much without her. And it's one of those pivotal moments of her realizing, I don't want to do this. Like, I'm halfway between belonging to, obviously Tess and Sedge are her family, but also belonging to this new family and having this loss of Liato weigh heavily on her, reminiscent of Sedge's death. Obviously this one is real, but how terrible of a moment for her to think about clothing in a time like that, to go back to high fashion. The fact that she has nothing to show her mourning and her reflecting on why it would be so easy for a family like Traimentus to have mourning clothes, because they have need of them all the time. Another little pocket of grief throughout this story that is one that is dear to the Vrzinian culture in general is the death of an entire clan. At the night of the Accords, they have all of the clans talk about the clan that they're representing, and one of them is representing the Israni clan. And the history behind that, it says, everyone knew that there were only 6 Vrzinian clans, where once there had been 7. The slaughter was centuries in the past, but the memory lived on. A whole city overwhelmed by madness of an ancient force, imprisoned outside reality by the gods. Something had slipped free of those chains and infected Fiabla. One day it was a prosperous city, the heart of the Ezrani. 11 days later, every person bearing the clan's name was dead. And so we have that amount of hurt that's carried through their oral traditions and their histories as well. You can see the kind of fear and the, I don't want to say idolization, but the remembrance of part of their culture that was taken from them, part of a clan that will, forever be lost to their histories. It was a very sad moment. When we learned as readers. Obviously, the Virginians have known this for a really long time, but I thought that moment was really meaningful. The last thing with grief I will talk about is the death of Ren's mother, which when we finally learn what happened to Ren and the fact that her mother was kicked out of their clan, she ends up getting sick and taking ill, and Ren is not able to take care of her. She's burning up and ends up passing on the street. And because of circumstances, essentially her body is raided and her shawl is taken from her, all of her possessions with the exception of the pattern cards that Ren has. Everything is taken of her mother. And as I read earlier, she wasn't able to give her mother the funeral rites that her people typically have because of the circumstances that she was in. It was just it was such a moment of, what is that called? Like a pivotal moment in your life. It's going to form your opinion of everyone around you. At that lowest point in Ren's life, it got lower because people took from her mother's corpse, and it's a hurt that affects her even to this day. You saw that whenever she has to give up a couple of her cards to take the curse off of Danni, Juna, and herself. She doesn't want to because it's the only thing she has left of her mother. It's just heartbreaking to see her still have that grief after such amount of time. Lastly, I want to talk about family and connection. And I think this is probably the reason that I love this series so much, is the amount of family, found family and, regular family within this series is just, it's absolutely gloriously done. I love the way that our relationships throughout these characters are formed through trial. It's not friendships and families in good times. Sometimes it is, but they're forged in fire, which I think, makes their relationships even better when you do find that, good things happen to them. So we have, our traditional family with the Trimentis family, Danni, Liato, and Juna, which I love each of them in turn. I think Juna's probably my least favorite. Liato, I love his heart. I love that he is fiercely loyal and, is kind of the golden retriever of the family. Danni will do anything for her family, even if it's wrecking everyone else. She's very distrustful of others, but for, good reason. And Juna is learning throughout the story who she wants to be. She's kind of been hidden away from the world, and so there's a lot of growth within her character as well. And then you have the maid family with Tess, Sedge, and Renata, who go through hell and high water together. There are so many instances in this book that show how much of a family they truly are. So many moments where they talk about the scar I think they have on their wrist, indicating their bond and the fact that they will always kind of be together it's just fantastic. And then you also have Gray and Kola, which is a moment of grief that I didn't talk about. So you do have Kolya, who is Gray's brother, who was killed not in this book, before this book happens, and that's one of the mysteries that they're solving throughout. And actually, I have a moment that I want to read that just discusses Gray's amount of grief that he has. Someone asks him that hasn't seen Gray in a while how he's doing, and essentially tells him that he's sorry to hear about his brother. And this was in Gray's head. Would he ever get used to it, feeling like he was being gutted from the inside? Would it ever go away? Gray swallowed down the misery and nodded. In a place like this, tears were only shed for the passing of heroes long dead. Kolya was a carpenter whose ashes hadn't been on the wind more than 6 months. And so he has this moment of longing to mourn his brother, but feeling like he doesn't have the right to. in this moment that's supposed to be, or in this place that's supposed to be safe for him. It's very heartfelt, and to see where his character goes throughout the rest of the story, I will tell you, is really, really fun to see him in the light of family. That's all I'll say. And then we have some moments between Sedge and Tess when they're trying to protect Renata. So Renata gets taken by Adrakia at the end of the book, and Tess and Sedge go looking for her at their old house. And Sedge tries to leave Tess behind, and she's like hell you're leaving me behind. She's my sister too, I'm helping. And I love those little tiny moments that just show their love for one another. With Liato and Juna, you have him calling her Minnow throughout, which I love those little terms of endearment. Him coming to Juna's rescue and risking a duel with Metzen to protect Juna's honor. Those little tiny moments, I think, just show you how much these characters care about one another. The last thing that I'll talk about is connection, and I just want to throw it out there that I love the interconnection and the interweaving of everything within, the interweaving of all the cultures that are happening with Levanti and Verzinian meshing into Nadezhrin. But I also enjoyed how all of the magics also played together. So you have Azurice's dream, you have the Numenatria that can get you into Azurice's dream. You have pattern happening within the dream. You have astrology essentially wrecking the fact that the birth charts didn't make sense. You have pattern cards that ended up curing a curse using Numenatria. There's just so many interweavings of all of the beliefs. There's a lot of beliefs with even Numen and Azurice's dream talking about the souls and Renata's, half of Renata's soul getting stuck, and how that really still works with the beliefs of the Verzinians as well. It's just kind of a different tilt of what they believe. I loved all of that. I like how all of it works together, even though some of the characters are too blind to see how much everything is interconnected. It's fantastic. I think it's masterfully done. And with that, my friends, this very long video comes to an end. This is an absolutely fantastic book, and I hope that you have enjoyed this discussion. If you have things that I didn't talk about in this video that you would like to discuss, please let me know in the comments. I would love to chat with you guys more about this. I will be continuing to do a series recap, but I'm gonna give myself a couple months break before I jump into The Liar's Knot, which is, or was at least, my favorite of the series. We'll see if it is on this reread. If you guys aren't feeling chatty, just leave me a little mask in the comments down below so I know that you guys are here. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!